Welcome to another episode of the Sports Sentiment. I am your host, Nick Urias, and we are back once again talking college football. It's already week 4, and we have ourselves a prime time battle between two 3-0 squads happening this Friday night in Pullman, Washington, between the San Jose State Spartans and the Washington State Cougars. A big time game. It's going to be on the national spotlight, and we'll most definitely get into the matchup, but a lot of people probably didn't have these two teams being 3-0 going into this primetime showdown. With me here today is a guy that knows Washington State Cougar football very well, as he is the sports editor and beat writer for Washington State football at the Daily Evergreen, also the sports director for KUGR student ran radio station at Washington State, Luke Westfall. Luke, thanks so much for taking some time out of your busy week to come on the podcast. And I already know it's a Friday game, so we're a little bit time crunched here. We got to get us a little day early here.
Yeah, absolutely. The Friday game is certainly interesting. This week, instead of going to practice and then, player press conference tomorrow and at, like 7, 8, 9 a.m. and Wednesday, we're doing practice this afternoon and press conferences for players at 6 tonight and then coach tomorrow again at 6 p.m. It's just a weird week, but it's always fun to have a little bit earlier of a week, but it'll certainly change some things for us and for the way work goes and for the teams. So it's definitely a bigger factor than I think most people think it is.
Yeah, and those are some great points. And then, for San Jose State, dude, they do got to travel up north to the games, and they're pretty much going to lose a whole day of as far as travel is concerned. That's
Yeah.
always a pain in the neck as well. But both of our squads are 3-0. San Jose State 3-0, coming off a win this past weekend versus Kennesaw State. And they beat Sacramento State in the season opener, trailed 14-0, won 42-24. Then they won their first ever game at Air Force. That was a conference game, 17-7 in a low-scoring slugfest there. And then this was kind of the showcase game for the offense to kind of get things really going, both sides of the ball for San Jose State, beating Kennesaw State 31-10. Coach Ken Niumatalolo for San Jose State, head coach that is, said Emmett Brown, starting quarterback for San Jose State, played his best game as a quarterback since commanding the offense, 355 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. Meanwhile, for your Cougars, Luke, I mean, this is a team that, obviously, they're playing a Mountain West schedule, but still in the Pac-12. But a team that 3-0, they welcome the Portland State Vikings and welcome all the fans and all the students back to campus and all the fans back to campus with the 70-30 win. And then you guys beat Texas Tech at home. No slouch there, beating a Big 12 team. And then obviously the big win this past Saturday in the Apple Cup. Talk to me about this 3-0 start here, because man, that rivalry game was electric. I was watching that game in the first half, and to see you guys go down in kind of a neutral site, still in Seattle where the Seahawks play, but still, anytime you win the rivalry game, obviously the Apple Cup holds a lot of volume. Talk to me from your perspective on how big that win was this past Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it, and I mean the neutral site thing, it is what it is. It was probably 70% purple in there. And it's definitely louder with the Washington stuff. But like Washington State fans show out the most that they can. But you're talking a smaller population, fan base, enrollment, and then 5 hours away anyways. So obviously you'd expect it, but still a good turnout, super fun. But they were super hyped up, obviously. Dicker was talking about before the game how the last Apple Cup was the most memorable win of his career. And Washington State, they talk every week about nameless, faceless opponents and the same preparation, not trying to make anything bigger or smaller than it is. But this one, I mean, like the players and Dicker admit, and throughout the week they admitted it, and now they admit it, of course, that this one is bigger and it was bigger. And they have a clock in their locker room that counts down to it every year. And they obviously take a ton of pride in it. The series historically isn't great, but in 2021, Washington State secured the largest margin of victory, and then we just won this game, obviously, in the first edition, where they're not both technically in the same conference anymore, and so obviously there's a lot on the line stakes wise with that. And then after the game, obviously we have plenty of local enrollment. 40% Washington State enrollment is from the West Side, anyways, so it's big for all of those students and those players. And then the fact that this was the neutral site edition leading into the next 4 years, that'll be back at the two schools' homes. It has implications for whether it'll be played beyond those 4 years anymore or not. And just winning in general is just big for this season. Being 3-0, getting a win that takes you from not really looked at all to now getting 30 AP votes, which is essentially 31st in the country right now. So obviously it is huge for multiple more reasons than just the rivalry. And so, yeah, I mean, it was a big win and they played okay, not their best, certainly. Washington certainly had a very sloppy, kind of uncharacteristic game that you would maybe expect earlier in the season. And maybe there's more to be said about the fact that it was in week 3 with so many moving pieces for Washington than at the end of the season like usual. But still, a win is a win. And obviously now, even though it is a rival, Washington State, just like Texas Tech, will hope that they continue to prove that they're a good team so that by the end of the season, it looks like a better and better win. So, yeah, great win, though. And obviously, huge implications.
Yeah, and I heard head coach Dicker after the game getting a little emotional there after the
Yeah.
win, talking about your quarterback John Mateer, which I know we're going to talk about a bunch, but kind of said, "Hey, he's already in the history books when you win that. When you win the rivalry game, doesn't matter when the rivalry game is played." I got my own opinion on, despite all this conference realignment stuff, should we really be playing rivalry games in week 3? But still, at least they're playing the game. And for your guys' sake, that was most definitely a good win. A lot of emotions flaring there. 3-0 for your Cougars, 3-0 for my Spartans. Are you a little surprised here for the 3-0 start here? Did you have this on your bingo card at all?
I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it was. I kind of looking at the schedule, I didn't think we were gonna be the team that we are currently for sure. At least from a play style perspective. Coming into the season, I expected Texas Tech probably to be better than they've started. So that one, I think once we kind of got to the game after their week 1 kind of debacle at home against an FCS team, I felt differently than I did coming into the season. And then with Washington, I honestly thought that they were a little bit better going into this week than I thought they were going to be going into the season, just with the turnover on the coaching staff and on the roster. So I think it's kind of goes both ways a little bit. I completely bias removed. Don't think I probably would have said we'd be 3-0 at this point. I think that I probably saw either the rivalry getting the better of us or Texas Tech. I don't think I would have seen us losing both games unless something catastrophic happened injury wise or something like that. And we have the last couple of years shown that we start faster just under this coaching staff. Last year, getting it ranked as high as 13th going into week 6, I think it was after the bye week in UCLA. So we have historically in this Dickert era gotten off to these fast starts. So I think it definitely bodes well for us that sort of the bigger name when you look at like power conference members are placed mostly in the beginning of the season. But I think, yeah, I mean, I don't think I probably would have predicted it before the season, but it's not completely shocking, especially based off of the team that I saw the first few weeks, which honestly, in that first Portland State game, I kind of started to believe in a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on board there as far as the San Jose State side. A lot of unknowns going into the year, new coaching staff, new OC, new quarterback. A lot of unknowns here. They did bring a lot back on the defensive side, but I think that the week 2 win at Air Force caught a lot of people by surprise and never won at Air Force. I think the Kennesaw and the Sacramento State games were a little bit more winnable, but still, nonetheless, I think Spartan fans out here in San Jose got to be pretty impressed here with the 3-0 start. I want to get your take on this Washington State offense because let's start right off with the quarterback, John Mateer. This guy has just been incredible. I mean, he's been probably one of the best quarterbacks in the country 3 weeks in. I mean, 700 plus passing yards. His dual threat capabilities are just insane. Like just watching him the past couple weeks, looking forward to this game. He is just so hard to bring down in the open field. And he's 16th in the country in rushing yards, and he's number 1 amongst all quarterbacks. What's your assessment here on Mateer? Because he's just been incredible.
Yeah, I spoke to somebody from Washington before the Texas Tech game, before for the Washington game eventually, obviously. So it's still very early in the season. He really didn't have to run much against Portland State because with the wide receivers against those Portland State defensive backs, all he kind of had to do was throw hitches and slants and outs and whatever, and they could just take it all the way. But when he did what he did against Texas Tech, which was shred them with his legs, obviously eye-opening. And from camp, from last year, being used as kind of a guy that would come in with Cam Ward to just run pretty much exclusively. We knew already that he loves to run and that his tendency is to run. He's obviously built big, he's athletic, he's fearless because he'll take the tackles and fight for the extra yards. But I don't think I kind of expected them to embrace it this much, I think, with the passing attack. But each of the last 2 weeks, though, it kind of was just opened up out of necessity because of a little bit of a struggle with the passing game. He did some things against Washington successfully passing, but he still only completed 15% or 50% of his passes and had an interception, should have had two, one that was not hauled in because it was just such a low throw. But he's still got some things to do with the accuracy. He's got great arm strength. Those are the things that I knew. And then we knew about the athleticism. What I didn't anticipate is one, how much he would run, and two, how much they would commit to it. But I guess three would be just how hard he is to tackle in the open field, even against power opponents, because mostly he got his run last year against Northern Colorado, this year against Portland State. So you're really not figuring anything out. Like those, they shouldn't be able to tackle you. But he's sprinting through the open field against Texas Tech. Nobody can bring him down. They're ripping his helmet off. He's still not going down. Targeting against Texas Tech last week, you're talking about a 3rd and 20 play where they're just expecting to make it a shorter field goal, and all of a sudden he's prancing and tiptoeing down the sideline to dive into the end zone. Like, the dude has shown every aspect of the rushing game that he can successfully do: footwork, physicality, breaking tackles, making people miss. He kind of can just do it all. And also, the underrated aspect is the fact that he has elite ball security so far. I've seen some other great scramblers in the game this year that have had fumbling issues. The one most notable that I like to bring up is on Friday night when I was watching, I think it was UNLV in Kansas. They had this
Oh
guy
yeah.
and they fumbled it and it got dropped 5 times. Anyways, that was just funny. But Mateer has not fumbled, or at least he has not lost a fumble yet so far this year. And I have to check again, but I don't believe he's fumbled yet this year. He's just so rock solid when he's running the ball. Passing wise, could use a little bit of work with the ball security, but so far he's just hard to bring down and he can't really get the ball out of his hands.
And obviously, there's another dimension here with Mateer. You got Wayshawn Parker. I think he's a true
Yeah.
freshman. He's been good to start out the season. Of course, you got Kyle Williams, who's a household name within this program now, and Josh Meredith, your other wide receiver, who's really taken more of an enhanced role this season. I mean, obviously, Mateer is the centerpiece here, but I'm very curious on your take on these other guys. You said Mateer's passing needs a little bit of work. I mean, have you liked what you've gotten out of these guys thus far? I know Kyle Williams has been the guy, but Parker may be a surprise. Meredith may be a surprise. This has been a pretty potent offense to start the season.
Yeah, definitely. Meredith was certainly a surprise this last week. They had been targeting him a lot, and obviously the last couple of years on scout team and second team, he's been working with Mateer, so they have sort of that chemistry and that connection, friendship and whatnot. And then he's been getting targeted more and more against Texas Tech. He had a couple of nice catches, but he also had a couple of drops. He, interestingly enough, is a non-gloves guy, so I don't know if that affects it at all, but it's just kind of funny. But last week he caught everything and he showed off a lot of his elusiveness, and he is just genuinely a really good route runner in the slot. Obviously, last year Lincoln Victor, who is now top 10 for a season in catches in school history, he's behind him, and he has been on the sideline for every game so far this year. So I think he's just kind of developing into a route running kind of consistent outlet at the slot position. Wayshawn Parker, yes, true freshman. He comes into the fold of a running back room last year that, was of a team that was averaging 3 yards to carry, and now he's already broken big plays in pretty much every game. 250 plus yard touchdowns week one and 40 plus yard touchdown week two, and big run last week too. He just kind of is due for a couple of explosive runs or catches every week. He's just so explosive. They don't use him necessarily as much because of Mateer, but I mean, Mateer runs a lot, but a lot of the time that he runs, it's either behind a lead blocker, which will usually be whoever the running back is, or it'll be off of a read option, some kind of play out of that he is ultimately reading, and it's usually Wayshawn that is the one that's there. I mean, Wayshawn is an interesting enough story because in California is a three-star recruit, but like he ran for over 1,900 yards and he ran for over 14 yards a carry in high school. I mean, he's been doing it for a while. And I mean, you might wonder why Washington State, how they even get a guy like that. Apparently, the story is that he was overweight his junior year and they didn't want him to do as good as he did his senior year, but he somehow stuck around and stayed true to his commitment. But I mean, those are the type of guys that you love to see, so explosive. Obviously, you'll burn his red shirt. And then honestly, at the end of the whole thing, you just hope a guy like Wayshawn Parker and Sean Mateer don't transfer, but you never know. I mean, the performances they're putting on, we'll see what happens. But it's fun to watch at least what happens now.
Yeah, most definitely. And, we talked about John Mateer and how he's been Washington State's box office product. But San Jose State's got one of their own here with Nick Nash. I know you've been probably hearing about him. He's starting to get a little bit more national love. I mean, how can he not? 34 receptions, 487 yards, 6 touchdowns through the first 3 weeks. He's first in the nation in all of those categories. Last week, he had 17 catches for his Kennesaw State. That was a Spartan record for most receptions in a game. I know you've probably heard about Nick Nash here going into the week. I mean, who are going to be some of the guys defensively? Because I know Tyson Durant, your safeties, had a good start to the season, and Ethan O'Connor as well. Are those going to be the guys that are going to be balling up Nash? I know Nash they could put him anywhere. You could line him up wide. They put him in the slot quite a bit. There's going to obviously be a whole lot of guys here lining up on Nash, who are just some of the names for the Cougar defense.
Yeah, absolutely. The funny thing is Dicker knows about him too, but he in his press conferences only says numbers, so I just know him more so as number three. But certainly I've heard about him, and I've been watching the San Jose State performances because even after week one, I was like, hey, I wonder how Emmett did in week one, and I was like, oh, pretty good. And then he's done pretty good, and then Kennesaw State, I was like, oh my goodness. And then I look down and I see 17, 225 at the three, and I was like, oh, come on. So yeah, certainly that's insane. I mean, Washington State has faced probably the best receiver that they've faced so far, most versatile would be like a former Washington State receiver in Kelly against Texas Tech. And he had a decent week. Basically, guys to watch, obviously O'Connor, and then him being a redshirt freshman, it would be important for him to have another week of development. But the main guy that Washington State has been running out is a more veteran guy in Steve Hall. He in week one had a 100-yard pick six. That was a program record. And he's kind of been the most consistent guy. He had some playing time last year when injuries came around, and obviously O'Connor's a little bit inexperienced. It's a rather inexperienced secondary in general, with um, two two of our secondary members getting drafted a year ago. One is on the Rams practice squad as a UDFA, and then the fourth, was just graduated. So it's a totally new look secondary from last year, so still inexperienced. But as you said, Durant has been coming along, tackled better in week two. We'll see how he does. He came up from Akron, so MAC play. The other safety position has been a little bit of a revolving door with injuries to Adrian Wilson, and then Jackson Latai-Mua, who's a converted nickel corner, and then obviously we'll see Steve Hall and O'Connor. So
And then, of course, heading into this game Friday night, Emmett Brown, San Jose State quarterback, has already got asked about it after the Kennesaw State game in his post-game interview, talking about going back to his old stomping grounds. And disclaimer, Luke has got himself an Emmett Brown connection here. Of course, Emmett was previously at Washington State before transferring to San Jose State. Offensive coordinator Craig Stutzman was also there for 2 years, who's the OC now at San Jose State. So I don't want to call it a little bit of a revenge, personal game. This is a game that's circled for these guys. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but obviously it's an important game. They get to go back to their old stomping grounds, these two, and I'm very curious to hear your Emmett Brown connection here.
yeah, Emmett is. It was interesting. I mean, my interactions with him were not super extensive. It was just one semester mostly. I had a class with him here in communications. It was basically the class was basically just like learning Adobe products and stuff. And he ended up being in my group, so it was me and him, and then two other guys. And every Sunday after he would play, we would all have to get together after we made a project in a different Adobe software, and we would all meet up and give critiques, and then we would see each other in class throughout the week. And I would talk to him a little bit about football during class and stuff. And then in another different separate class, I was like, hey, like I know a guy on the football team, we can do our project on him. So I went and I got some film with him, and then we did an interview with him and did a project with him. So all super cool stuff. And obviously he was a super cool guy. I mean, the only thing I knew about him was that he was a quarterback. That's how I sort of learned about him. And so I could start to point him out during warmups and all that sort of stuff. And this was not last year. This was 2 years ago. So before he was kind of in that third string role last year. But 2 years ago, I knew for a fact that he was on the football team and he was just a super cool dude, funny, good interactions all around, and just a solid guy. And then last year, he got a chance to play a little bit in one FCS blowout game where he came in, and I feel like it was kind of unfair because it probably would have been just a solid touchdown drive, but it gets tipped at the line and intercepted or whatever. But I had a feeling he would transfer. Obviously, he was learning behind guys, and I think it benefits him now to go to where he is at San Jose State, that he learned for 2 years behind obviously Mateer, who can run and throw a little bit and do all of that, but also behind a guy in Cam Ward who will probably be in the NFL, is doing his thing at the highest level at Miami now. So he had those influences. And Dicker was talking about Emmett today, and he was like, man, how cool is it that of our quarterback room a year ago, one guy's a Heisman candidate, another one is a sensation on the West Coast, and another one in Emmett almost has 1,000 yards this season, like just is doing his thing on a 3-0 team. And so it's really cool to see him get the chance to come back here and do that. It's also not one of those things where it's going to be like heated from the standpoint of people are mad that he transferred or he disrespected WSU or whatever. Like it's the feeling is that it's super cool that Emmett, who obviously wants to play and obviously has the talent to play, transferred to a school where he had the opportunity, and now he's putting all of his skills on full display. So it's super cool to see. I've been rooting for him. If he does good this Friday, I'll be super happy for him. Obviously, biased wise, I want Washington State to win, but I just think it's a super cool storyline to get to come back here as one of those transfers that maybe not as many people talked about, but ended up being a guy that, even though he would have been the backup for Washington State just because Mateer had been here, is certainly proven himself as one of the most efficient and effective, at least statistical wise, quarterbacks in college football so far. So super cool.
Yeah, and going back to your point, he got opportunity last year, only 9 passing attempts, so extremely small sample size there. You mentioned it was an FCS team as well, so good or bad, I mean, you can't really take too much from there. But
Yeah.
he's been awesome. He's been awesome. I mean, I've talked to him a couple times after practice. Great player on the field, just as great off the field. I mean,
Mm.
cool guy. He'll head late. He'll head late to the weight room. Just to make time for everybody to get the interviews in going into game week. So Emmett's been great. It's been awesome having him in San Jose, and obviously, with your Washington State connection, him being there, learning behind two veterans. You mentioned that quarterback room. I mean, it's amazing to see what that quarterback room from last year is doing this year. Obviously, with Ward and Emmett at different spots. Going into this game, obviously you're rooting for Emmett. You want Washington State to win, but some matchups of the game here. I mean, obviously there's going to be Nick Nash versus whoever lines up against him. I think it's the Spartan defense versus John Mateer. Just limit him at all things possible because no one's been able to do it yet. I'm looking at maybe the secondary option here for wide receiver 2 in San Jose State, and Justin Lockhart versus maybe a guy like Ethan O'Connor here, because Lockhart is a guy that likes to line up wide. Lockhart is one of these guys for San Jose State. where he didn't play last year, but he's got over 5 years of playing in the Mountain West. He's been to these rambunctious atmospheres. I know Martin Stadium always likes to get loud for their home games. It's going to be crazy for obviously on a primetime stage here, but I think Justin Lockhart is going to need to be successful here if the Spartans want to get themselves a victory, because I think everyone is going to try to limit Nash here going into game week here. And, obviously, I think a guy like Kyle Williams is essential here. I think obviously Mateer needs to get his legs going, but if you could get a guy like Kyle Williams for your guys' sake and for Cougar Nation, if you guys could get Kyle Williams, I'm looking at a guy for San Jose State and Michael Dansby, who's had himself an interception in week 1, and he's been very good. I think those are some of the several matchups that we'll see here and ultimately be a difference maker in this one.
Yeah, I think you're definitely onto something with that. The only note I have for you with Kyle Williams is, according to just what we heard so far today from Dickert, he pretty much last week was playing at about 70%. He had to come out of the game for injury against Texas Tech, and he's not been anywhere near 100%. He's made some plays. He's looked kind of good on some plays, but they haven't been targeting him as much. I certainly think that they'll try and get him the ball because Dicker talked today about wanting to get back to their identity of being a passing offense, being more effective there. I certainly think they'll try and get him the ball. It'll just be a health thing, I think. And so we'll have to see if that hampers him at all or, draws him closer to earth in some of those matchups against secondary and whatnot. So that'll be interesting to see. And, yeah, I mean, it'll pretty much all be on the perimeter. Washington State really doesn't use tight ends at all. And so it will be those perimeter matchups, like especially Kyle Williams, that you'll see on the outside. It'll be interesting to see Washington State. They certainly gave up some big plays last week. They've struggled a little bit to tackle opposing ball carriers. They didn't get to see Taj Brooks against Texas Tech, but last week against Jonah Coleman and in week 1, they really struggled against the rush, even over 200 yards against Portland State. So I'll be interested to see how that happens. But on the defensive side, I think you also hit it on the head with a couple of explosive receivers that both obviously were in triple digits last week, with Emmett slinging it around. Washington State gave up some deep plays last week, a couple of deep balls to Giles Jackson, who is the slot guy for Washington, but it certainly could happen anywhere. I think that we've also had some injuries in our secondary, not injuries that have kept anyone out for more than a drive or two, but through the last 2 weeks, we've seen multiple different corners from Hall to O'Connor to Wilson come out of the game at points and then go back in. So I think health could potentially play a role, but I agree with you that it'll be those perimeter matchups that will play large factors in this game.
Yeah, and you talk about with Jackson for the Huskies being you guys over the top. Craig Stutzman has shown in the first 3 games for the San Jose State offense that he is more than willing to throw it down the field. We saw that versus Kennesaw. They did it on the opening drive versus Air Force, and then Sacramento State was obviously the Spartans were successful there.
Yeah.
Before we close things out here, Luke, this is a game for the Spartans and the Cougars. I'm interested to see as far as the game script is concerned here, because I think both teams are going to have success offensively. The scheme, the spread and shred offense for San Jose State's worked out tremendously well thus far. And, I think it's going to ultimately come down to who's going to make stops down the stretch. I'm also very intrigued here with this inexperienced group. A lot of the guys, for at least on the San Jose State side, have not played in a hostile environment. This will be the most hostile environment. They've only played 1 road game. Air Force wasn't too rowdy, but Washington State, I think, will probably be their most rowdiest atmosphere thus far into the season. And, with the new coaching staff, a lot of Spartan fans haven't seen if this game is close. How does a guy like Emmett Brown handle the pressure in a 2-minute drill if it's a 1-possession game? The Spartans are trailing. Coach Ken Niumatalolo, how does he manage the timeouts? I know college coaches, NFL coaches. Coach Ken's been around for a long time, but we don't really know how these coaches are down the stretch here as far as taking their timeouts, under pressure goes. I'm very interested to see, if this game is close for San Jose State, even for the Washington State side, how do these defenses and offenses handle it? Because I think there is a little bit unknowns on the San Jose State side. Obviously, you guys winning a nail biter last week in the Apple Cup obviously helps out with that scenario, but interesting dynamic here heading into Friday night's matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. And Washington State, they obviously didn't have any kind of that sort of a situation in week 1 and 2. You're talking about a 40 point and a 21 point win. So they didn't really have to face that last week. The first time they really had to face that, honestly, they had success in the first half offensively. And when it came down the stretch, adjustments from the Washington defense kind of made the Washington State offense stall, especially down the stretch. So it'd be interesting to see if they can offensively make adjustments if, San Jose State's defense can sort of figure out what WSU is trying to do. And then defensively, last week, it was basically the old bend but don't break approach. Plenty of yards, plenty of big plays, and Washington State just kept forcing them to kick field goals. And so they were able to get just enough points down the stretch that field goals didn't hurt them. And then they made the final play, obviously, on a fourth down on the 2 yard line to end the game. And so it was that bend but don't break approach, which I think could potentially suit a team well down the stretch in crunch time, but we'll have to see. It was the first time that so far that they've had to do that late in a game with the game on the line. And so I also think that there was something to be said about just like Washington's play call and this, that, and the other, and stuff on the Washington side that, if done potentially more effectively, could change the scenario. But so far, there's been one test down the stretch in a clutch that the defense passed, and the offense kind of got bailed out on by the defense. So we'll see if they can do it again, if that is how it is going to go this week, because I certainly think that Mountain West opponent or not, like, I think San Jose State's offense has shown how good they can be. And even though it is Washington State now, I just think the way that they play defense, Washington State, it is still going to be a high scoring game, as you mentioned. It certainly didn't stop Portland State from doing what they do, which is put up yards on the ground in week 1. And so I think that they will certainly get their yards. It'll just come down to red zone and finishing off drives for San Jose State. Can they put the ball in the end zone instead of set it for field goals? And if they can put the ball in the end zone, then we could see a very, very close game down the stretch.
Well, there you have it. Luke, thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, a big one for you guys in Pullman, Washington. And for us Spartan fans, if they're not making the trip, they'll be most definitely watching from home on their television sets. Before we close things out, where can people find you? I know you're doing a lot of stuff over there at Washington State. Where can people find your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you want to check some of this stuff out, coverage on this, my work, at least writing wise, which is what will mostly cover this game, I'll probably be writing something previewing this tonight and tomorrow and going up to the game. Is just, if you look up Luke Westfall, which is basically just as it sounds, it's Luke and then the word West and then the word Fall. And you look that up, it should pop right up. But if it doesn't, it's just Luke Westfall Daily Evergreen, and there should be just a thing. It's a green little tree, and you just click on that. It'll take you right to my profile, which is where pretty much all of our football coverage comes from. So if you want any more stuff on that, then definitely go there. Um, and yeah, and check out the game, and then I'll obviously write something after it. But you can check me out there, and then obviously my all of my social medias, which don't really post anything crazy, but are all pretty much just Luke Westfall. So, but that evergreen place is really where my football coverage is. So anything WSU related that you might want to know, you can always check out over there. So
There you have it. Luke Westfall from Washington State. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today to preview San Jose State versus Washington State primetime battle on Friday night in Pullman. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Nick Urias _. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube. Once again, I am your host, Nick Urias from the Sports Sentiment, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.